guys, welcome back to the Uncommodified podcast. I'm Tim Windsor, and I'll be your host again today of another Uncork conversation with my good friend, partner, colleague, and all-around person who makes me better on every day of the week. Well, except the weekends. No, still the weekends. Amanda, how are you?
I am good. How are you, Tim?
I'm excellent. It is Monday morning. It is 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Before we get too far into it, we should probably uncork this with a cup of what? Coffee?
Today it is coffee. Yeah.
Coffee. A cup
Uh-huh.
of Java Joe. Do you know why do they call it Joe? Do you know why they call it Joe?
I don't know why they call it Joe.
All right, listeners, if you Google that and send it in to me, why do they call coffee a cup of Joe? I don't even know. It's a saying I've heard. So it's Monday morning, Amanda. What'd you do on the weekend?
I'm a hockey mom, so I was traveled about an hour and a half to do a game with my goalie hockey son, and
Excellent.
had a birthday celebration for another son. So it was a bit of a busy weekend. What about you, Tim?
Well, we had the grandkids over for breakfast yesterday. That's always exciting because that's like full on energy at 7:30 in the morning on Sunday. That was excellent. Set up a new office in my house for my business. Just taking care of regular business, and of course, hanging out with my lovely wife. So that's what we did. Went out for dinner on Friday night and had a great dinner. Life. We did life. Very
Nice.
good. So
That's
listen,
awesome.
yeah, it is. And listen, man, we're going to kick this off now. Now that we've done the cordial things about our weekend and everything, we're going to kick this conversation off. And for those of you listening in today, this conversation was sparked because of an experience that I had recently. And I shared it with Amanda, and Amanda said, "Yeah, I think I've heard about that before." And then she shared it with some colleagues, and they said, "Oh yeah, that happened." So this is one of the "Oh yeah, it happens" kind of story, and we're going to talk about this thing that happens in business primarily when we're working with our teams as leaders, when we're working with our employees, and as employees working with their leaders. So let me tell you a quick story. So a while ago, I encountered somebody who is an employee at a company actually I don't consult with, but a company that I'm aware of in my community, and they shared this story with me, and man, it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and it really got me thinking about it. And basically, what they said is, they were frustrated. They were very frustrated, Amanda and listeners. They were very frustrated with their employer, with their leader, with their team members, even. And the reason for that is this particular person is, we'll call them an all-star employee. I mean, this person is a rock star employee, extremely productive, extremely efficient, extremely effective, and they were feeling that at the end of the day that wasn't a really great thing for them. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Why wouldn't you want to be all those things? And they said, well, because something happens sometimes when you do that, and that is you get this amazing gift, this person said. And I said, well, an amazing gift? I want a gift. She said, no, you would not want this gift. And I said, well, what's the amazing gift? And she said, it's the gift of more work. It's the gift of the work of others, because they aren't carrying their weight. They are struggling. And instead of dealing with that sometimes, boom, all of a sudden the gift comes to the really effective and productive employee. And so what we want to talk about is this scenario. Now, I know it's hard to believe. I mean, some of you are employees are thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe that would ever happen. And some of you as leaders, you want to deny it happens. I get it. But this is a conversation we want to tuck into the implication and the impact of this thing. How amazingly productive, efficient, and effective employees get rewarded, but sometimes it doesn't feel like a reward for them because they get rewarded with the work of less productive, effective, and efficient employees. Now,
Yep.
Amanda, can you affirm or deny that
Yep.
this happens?
Well, I can absolutely affirm it. I saw it. Used to be a saying we had. Oh, the reward for good work is more good work, and so I knew people who tried to fly under the radar and just do just enough work, so they didn't get rewarded with the work of other people in the department. So it does have that backward effect, right?
Interesting. So some people, sort of take down their productivity a level or two just not to get noticed. Because if you don't get noticed, my gosh, they won't give you more to do. Oh, that is a sad commentary actually on those individuals. But at the same time, they obviously feel a little bit pressured into that response because of the environments they live in. And I know that when we started bantering this around a couple of weeks ago, you went out and I think you were actually maybe at a hockey game. I
Yep.
think. And you were sharing this with a colleague of yours from the past, I think you were saying.
Yep, another hockey mom. I was
Uh,
chatting with another hockey mom and I was saying how we were noticing this was a trend and she just totally said absolutely. I know managers who are doing this right now who aren't dealing with the problem children per se on their teams and overloading the good people. To the point of burnout, and that it really is something that she's seeing in real time happening too. So we know it happens in across industries and across different work environments.
Absolutely. Okay, so again, you're listening in today. You're a leader, you're an employer, you're a leader. Listen in because you might be apt to be doing this, or you might be subtly doing it, or you might be doing it all the time. And you might be an employee who one feels pressured to sort of lower your bar of productivity so you don't get noticed, or maybe you're an employer who's suffering under this problem. This conversation is for you. So, Amanda, let's talk about this. Why does this happen? I mean, it's pretty clear it doesn't sound like a really good idea to do to somebody. So, why do
Yep.
a really smart, amazing people, because I'm sure they are great people who come in to do a great job as leaders, why do they do this and why does this happen?
Well, I think on the simple level, Tim, all of us can relate to the crunch is coming, a deadline is coming, you need something done. You're going to turn to the person who gives you the path of least resistance. And overachievers are the ones that are least likely to push back. They're going to say, yeah, I'll take it. You know it'll get done. And so in the moment, it seems like the right thing to do, right? But I actually think in the moment there's the choices you think you're making sort of consciously, and then I think there are other factors at play that are perhaps unconscious. So let's think about those for a second. If you're really being honest with yourself as the leader or the manager, you want to look good, right? And at the end of the day, what you've been asked to deliver on, you want the best person on that job because it'll reflect on you. It'll make yourself look good at the end of the day. And if that's all you're focusing on and not thinking about developing people and making sure you have a high performing team, that could actually be the reason you're overloading your high achievers.
Hmm.
You could also know you have underachievers and things aren't getting done. You need them to move. And so rather than dealing with those underachievers and having the hard conversations, you just take the work away from them and put it on your high achievers because it's a lot easier. There's less arguing, there's less having to have those tough conversations. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think those two things are the number one sort of in your face reasons. But what we don't think about when we do that is the non-salary costs to that, right? So that comment I made about how when everybody sees that that's what's happening, everybody lowers their productivity a little bit because they don't want to stick out and get overloaded and burnt out, and so your whole overall productivity goes down. And if you're not thinking about your performance of your team overall, you're going to pick the quick fix, right,
Hmm.
Tim?
Yes, yes. I have picked the quick fix every once in a while in my life. It doesn't work. Let me tell you, I'm 56 years old, soon to be 57 in the summer, and the quick fix does not work. So, listen, if you're listening in again, just think about those couple of reasons that Amanda mentioned. So, number one, it's easier for you as a leader to do this, and you want to look good. So, of course, you want to look good and you want to get that thing done on time and you want to get it done amazingly. So, you turn around and you look to the people who are going to make you look good in the process. So, I think that's a real powerfully simple reason why great people, smart people do this, which is subconsciously or maybe consciously, they're recognizing, hey, that my image, my reputation, the impact of what I'm doing is on the line, and I'm going to make sure that I put my best person on it, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing, as long as I suppose you're not taking it off someone else to put on them. So I guess that's first thing. And then that second piece that you mentioned, Amanda, I think really, again, there's truth there when you think about that one. And that is this whole idea that we don't want that difficult conversation. And so I guess the reality is that this problem didn't start in the moment when you had to get that thing done and you took work or assigned work off of somebody else onto somebody else. The problem doesn't start in that moment. That's the tip of the iceberg. The problem probably starts weeks or months or maybe years in some cases in advance when, as you said, the leader is unwilling, unable, No, I don't think unable, unwilling to have that difficult conversation regarding a lack of performance or performance problems with an employee. So let's tip into that one because I think part of the solution here, I'm assuming, Amanda, is if I have that conversation earlier and more often with a person who isn't carrying their weight, then that's going to start to change the dynamic of how I look at shuffling that work. So how do I have that kind of conversation? I mean, that's difficult. I mean, if I came to you and said, "Hey, Amanda, you ain't carrying your weight, sister," I don't think that's going to go too well sometimes. So how do I have that conversation and it go well for me and for them?
Oh, wow. Well, you know what? I would even back up before the conversation, right? In terms of, are you setting the stage of expectations with your team members individually and as a team so that people actually identify and recognize the importance of their role in showing up on that team?
Hmm.
Because I think a lot of times people think, well, if I don't bring my best to work, no one's going to notice, right? Other people will pick it up. And I think you have to lay that groundwork as a leader of what you expect of your team and then what you expect of the individual contributions to that team. And then
Hmm.
once you've done that, you now have a platform to have conversations, right? Because you have expectations that are very clearly laid out that you can now have ongoing conversations with each individual team member. And you can do that for your underperformers and your high achievers. Right? So that you're talking about, listen, we talked about these are the expectations. This is where you hit the mark. Where do you think you hit the mark and where do you think you're falling short? And engage your team members in that conversation of talking about their own performance because there's got to be some personal accountability here, not just for you as the leader and how you're delegating the work, but personal accountability for each of the members on the team for what they're bringing to the team.
Okay, so that's really good advice. So again, going back even further on the iceberg, that lower
Yeah.
down than I even said. So
Yeah.
when people are hired, setting expectations, understanding what contributing to the team looks like, having a conversation up front of what happens when we don't achieve expectations. How are we going to
Mhm.
handle it? What are those expectations? And I like what you just said. Creating an environment of personal accountability where the manager or leader in and of themselves isn't holding people's feet to the fire all the time, which is because that is a terrible environment. I often say to leaders, if you create an environment where you have to hold people's feet to the fire, that's going to be problematic because you don't know when to take them out of the fire and you're going to burn their little feet off because you don't know when enough is enough. And when I put my hand in the fire, over the stove, I know when it's time to take it off. And if you put my hand over there, you might burn it to a crisp. So creating an environment where you as a leader do not have to hold people accountable, but they hold themselves accountable by asking better questions of themselves, how they're going to contribute, how they're going to meet expectations. What are they
Yeah.
going to do, I guess, when they're struggling? I mean, that's another point because sometimes people aren't getting their work done, not just because they're bad people not wanting to do a job, but they're struggling with something, maybe a learning or maybe a process that's been changed and they're struggling with it. And they're not able to stick their hand up and say, I need help. So again,
Yeah.
creating an environment where people can stick up their hand and saying, I know I am not adjusting well to this new process, and I know I'm slowing the team down. Hey, I need some help here.
Yeah.
What a great environment that would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And Tim, I know you have experience and have done a lot of research into what do you do after you've done all those things,
Hmm.
right? So after you've laid those expectations and you've had those personal accountability conversations and you still have someone on your team that isn't performing to the standard that you would hope. And I know you've got some interesting strategies on that.
Yeah, and I think for me, and I will just say right now, a lot of my thinking has been informed by a particular book that I read a number of years ago by Dr. Henry Cloud, and it's called Necessary Endings. I think the subtitle might be In Life and Business, something like that. If you never have read that book, Necessary Endings in Life and Business, you need to get that book. Now, again, I would say if you're a leader of people, you need to get that book so that you can understand how to lead people and understand what it looks like when you have to have a necessary ending type of conversation, maybe because it's gotten that bad. But if you're just a person in relationship, that book is for, yes, it's for work, but it's also for human relationships in totality. The reality is that we have some relationships that might need to end. Now, not every relationship of underperformance needs to end, of course, but he has a really powerful model, a conversational model in there in relationship to how do I deal with somebody who I'm struggling with, who isn't performing in the relational expectation, either of the job or maybe a personal relationship, but this is the case of the job. And it all starts for him with this really powerful question. And again, I want you to think about today, if you're a leader and you have somebody underperforming in your team, I want you to think about this because this is the first question that Dr. Henry Cloud would ask you in the book, and that is, do you have real faith to believe that person can improve and become the person you need them to be in that job? And if you don't, he would say that's just wishful thinking, and if it is, then all bets are off. So that's where it starts: is do you believe, do you believe, Amanda, that Tim can do this job and do it well and do it at the capacity that is required to be a contributing team member? Because if you don't, then you need to honor that lack of belief and you need to move in a certain direction. Because it all starts with belief or faith. Because belief or faith, if you think about these two words intertwined, these are powerful words that intertwine together. And when we lose faith in somebody, whether we know it or not, it'll start be expressed in our actions. And if I lose faith in you, Amanda, I actually also stop delegating work to you.
Yep,
So
that's
because,
right.
and even though I've not admitted it yet, if I start losing belief and faith in you, and I have more belief and faith in, in Sally, I'm going to take more work and put it on the people I believe in. So this actual idea, when you think of it, is probably also at the crux of this problem, which is we tend to put our money on the horse that doesn't just show but wins. Not
Yep.
just the horse that shows up, but the horse that wins the race. So belief is a powerful thing. And so when you think about that, like, how do you think that this really is, in essence, probably the starting point as he's talking about? Do you think that belief is really the starting point for you, Amanda, when you think about this?
Oh, I think so, Tim, because I think you can sit down and have a conversation, and if you don't think that or believe in that person, right, you can say the words, but both of you sitting in that office know that it's just a conversation and it's not going anywhere, and there's not going to be any follow through.
Hmm.
And why waste your time? Because you're just lying to yourself that something's going to change, and they know it, right? It's sort of like a parent telling a
Hmm.
kid, if you do that, this is going to be your consequence. And if you have a history as a parent of not following through on the consequence, your kid's going to do it anyway, right? So
Hmm.
so I think really it does start with belief. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's a critical piece, and even our systems. Some companies have very well developed or mature performance management systems or whatever. But at the end of the day, because as much as we want to, maybe we've disconnected performance to pay, or maybe they're connected, depends on our organization. But oftentimes, and I hear this complaint from organizations and even leaders in organizations, particularly middle level managers, which is, we do all this stuff and we want to encourage productivity and stuff, but then we give everybody the same raise. So the reality is
Yeah.
there's really not a lot of incentive sometimes for pitching in and doing not only your job well, but actually, but that other stuff that you're asked to do. And that's the part of the problem is that cost of living, or whatever you might call it in your country, cost of living increases, seems like that's basically an expectation. And so my wage is always going to go up regardless of how I perform. So that's a challenge. Now, Dr. Henry Cloud goes on to say, once you've set this idea, do you believe? And if the answer is yes, you believe, then he would say, then and only then do you enter into this conversation. He has this very simple model for it. But part of it is depersonalizing the situation, because these can become very awkward conversations. When I'm talking to Bob about his lack of performance, that's an awkward conversation for Bob and for myself. And so the one thing he would say is, look, you separate that. In his model, you basically disconnect or depersonalize the conversation. In the beginning, you talk about the job and the role, and what is required, the requirements of that job and the role. And then you you have that person measure themselves against that, and you do the same. So, you depersonalize it, which is helpful because these can be emotionally charged discussions, particularly if people are blamers, serial blamers, because when you tell them that you're concerned about their performance, it's easy for them to find the 1,001 excuses why they cannot get their job done or they're underperforming. And when you think about your own experience before you started consulting full time, I mean, when you look at your employees over the years, I mean, when they weren't cutting the mustard, when they were not keeping up, what did they tend to look to or blame if they didn't take accountability themselves, Amanda?
Me as the manager. Yeah, honestly, right? And so,
Me.
or they would blame the fact that the priorities have shifted. So you asked me to do this, but then you asked me to do this. So of course I didn't do what you asked me to do in the first place, right? So they would often blame shifting priorities. And I had a few cases that I saw over the years where things in personal life were, I'm really sorry. They came to the conversation very apologetic. I haven't gotten these things done, but I have this sickness, or my child has been sick, or like, and some of those things are very legitimate reasons.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they are. And I think the thing is, and I think at that point in the conversation, I think part of it is, I would say, as a leader, if you're brilliant into that conversation, you got to ask yourself, is what the person's telling me is the barrier to their ability to be as productive as you need to be? Is it an anomaly or is it a systemic excuse?
Right.
Meaning, there's only so many times I get to tell you, Amanda, the dog ate it. I'm
Correct.
sorry, I don't have my homework done, Mrs. Jones, because the dog ate it. And there's only so many times that my grandma can die. So I think part of it is parsing out in your mind when you're talking to somebody who maybe is saying, and maybe there are valid reasons why they're not keeping up. And the question I think is, again, is this anomalous? Or is this a systematic trend that this is always the go-to convenient problem or excuse in their life that means that they cannot contribute to the team? And regardless of the reason, the impact is the same. And that's the challenge, right? Because at the end of the day, if I am struggling with some difficulties in my life and it is affecting my work, the end result on my colleagues is the same. Now, maybe that's where, when there are those things, I need to be more transparent with people about what's going on in my life. Because if I'm not honest and telling you, hey, I'm really sorry, but right now my mother-in-law lives with us and we're dealing with some difficult dementia stuff and we're up at night and that's definitely affecting my performance. If I don't stick my hand up, people can't contextualize it. I think if I do stick my hand up, I think most people are going to be reasonable to adjust their expectations, at least for in the interim.
Yeah. And you know what, Tim, that goes right back to, are you setting a team culture where it feels safe to do that? Right? To be able to say that I'm facing some challenges. So, as a leader, asking yourself that, am I creating an environment where staff or on my team feel like they can actually do that?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not hearing about what's going on the weekend and the hockey games and things, ask yourself why not? Because, you might not have the team environment that you think you do.
No, no, that's really true. So let me ask you a question, Amanda. When you think about this problem as we're talking about it, and you look at the impact, why do you think that a manager, again, beyond some of the reasons we just talked about, but if I choose not to have that conversation,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I want to move into it. I've chosen not to have it as a manager. I don't want to have it, but now I recognize that I need to have that conversation. At what point do I recognize that the cost of having this person on the team is too large and being to be borne by my team members? Which, by the way, it's not usually borne by me, right? It's borne by the team members. So,
Yeah.
I mean, do you believe that eventually this means that we may have to part ways, or do you believe that there are other ways to do this? And what do you think? Do you think people are calculating the cost of that decision, maybe to let somebody go, against other factors, and they're sort of doing the math and saying, "Oh no, this is okay," not, as you said, calculating the cost on the employee? Like, what's going on there? Do you
I don't
think?
think, man, honestly, if from my experience, Tim, I don't think managers sit down and do that cost analysis for themselves. I
Mm,
think if many of us did, if many managers did, they would realize that it's far more costly to keep someone who's not willing to be a full contributor to the team on the team. And that's why they're still on the team,
mm,
because you haven't actually paused and gone through the line of thinking of what is it costing me in productivity, in staff morale, in my own time and effort trying to get this person moving, or even picking up their pieces myself on the weekends because they didn't get something done. And if you added all of those costs up, I think you would do something about it. But I think very rarely do we actually sit down and monetize or quantify what those costs are. The
mm,
other thing is your point around depersonalizing the conversation and having a good framework to do that. I don't think very many managers have those at their fingertips. And so what they're thinking and weighing in terms of costs in their mind, I know I did when I was a manager, was, do I want to have a personalized argument with someone?
Right.
And unless I have those tools given to me where I can have a depersonalized, fact based conversation around team performance and job fit, I'm going to ignore it because I don't feel equipped to have the conversation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And again, if you didn't get it the first time, I'll bring it back here. You need to get the book. You guys need to buy this book, Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. Great book. Some great strategies in there, and exactly what Amanda's talking about, a good construct and a good model for having this conversation. And ultimately, in this model, he would say, look, we lay out those expectations. We express belief in the person. Again, if we believe and if we don't believe, we shouldn't even go down that road. That all bets are off at that point. But if we believe, we should depersonalize it, talk about the role and responsibilities and the requirements and the level of job performance and productivity we need. We should check that they still believe they can do it and they want this job, because sometimes the reality is they have decided a long time ago this is not the job for them, but they haven't also been able to come to grips with that. And so although their body's there, their mind and heart aren't there anymore. And so he would say part of it is express your belief, but check their belief to make sure they still want to do the job, because sometimes you're going to find they don't. And if both of you do have belief, then his next part of his model would say, look, you need to lay out a very structural way of looking at it. You need to agree, negotiate a timeline of expectation delivery, and then you need to shake hands and effectively negotiate in advance and say, look, if I'm talking to you, Amanda, his model would say, look, okay, we're agreeing that by September 1st, this year, that you're going to be functioning on all cylinders and performing all your job functions. Excellent. Listen, I just want to be clear. On September 2nd, if that's not true, you're telling me, Amanda, this is not the job you want anymore. So again, I'm not telling you. You're telling me by your behavior, this isn't the job that you want. And then we're going to have a different discussion. And he would say, set that up in advance. So really simple model, but really powerful. And you're right, most leaders are not equipped to deal with that. And it really starts, those two things, if you get them straight. One, if you don't believe in this person anymore,
Yeah.
stop pretending. Second of all, if you do, then have a depersonalized conversation about the job role and function that's required on your team, and then check their belief. Because sometimes, again, if you don't believe or they don't believe, you're done. You're finished, and you gotta acknowledge that. Because it's the cost of severance, of severing somebody or asking them to leave, although it seems high in the moment, and it could be tens of thousands of dollars, I suppose. But even if it is, what you're saying is the math actually could still work for me and my team, right? Because I'm actually making my other team members pay that money, in a sense. That I'm taking that pound of flesh, in the Shakespearean sense, off of my employees to pay that debt of the lack of productivity of another employee, aren't I?
You are. And let's say, for example, you're not willing to deal with the underperformer. And so you continue to overload your high performer. And that high performer burns out. Their productivity starts to tank. They start looking for another job because
Yeah,
they feel underappreciated. And if they ultimately leave, most organizations have a general sense of what turnover costs them in terms
mm,
of having to recruit and onboard and retrain. And I bet you that those costs of having to replace your high performer are going to be pretty significant, right?
yeah,
And so really paying attention to not only the cost of not dealing with the
mm,
underperformer, but the costs of overloading your high achievers.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great point. And the other thing, I suppose, is that if you have a really good conversation, you can also uncover learning opportunities for that person that are maybe the part of the barriers of their being productive enough. Maybe, they went to the training like everybody else on the new system, and maybe they were insecure and weren't able to stick their hand up when everybody else said, yeah, got it, got it, got it. They
Yeah.
weren't able to stick their hand up and say, I'm sorry, I don't get it yet. And so there could be some things underneath that, some learning opportunities that we might uncover, some coaching opportunities, I suppose, also for those high achievers, getting them to coach instead of just doing the job. Maybe a better strategy, Amanda, is instead of, asking you to do this job because Bob can't, maybe I should partner with Bob and ask you to help me partner with Bob to train him and coach him more, so that this idea, if we give a man a fish, he eats for a day, we teach a man to fish, we teach Bob to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. Maybe that's part of that strategy that we can involve the high performers in coaching and training, so that we can spread that workload more evenly.
Well, yes, if that's in fact what the high achiever on your team really wants to do, right?
Fair enough.
And motivates them. And that actually uncovers another piece, right? Sometimes it's very innocent that we're giving tons of work to that high achiever on our team because we actually think as the manager that they love it because
Mm,
they're so willing to say yes
yeah,
and they want the exposure to senior leadership and to new projects and opportunities and so they're saying yes and so you're giving them more work because you think they're loving it.
yeah.
But what you need to make sure you do is have just as an intentional conversation with that high potential person to
Mm,
make sure that the work you're giving them is in fact growing them in the areas they want to grow in from a career perspective and that they're actually getting the opportunities that they want, right? And so sometimes we neglect having those performance learning and development conversations with our high achievers because hey, they're hitting it out of the park. Why do we need to talk about it?
yeah, yeah. No, really true. And and as you say that, Amanda, it reminds me also. You and I have been, reading a book with several of the senior executives that we work with at this moment, and we've been reading this book. It's a business classic written a long time ago called Good to Great by Jim Collins. Again, if you don't have that book, you should pick it up. It's an older book, but great book. And although over time there was some failures of the companies they studied, the solid work behind that still stands in my mind. And there's lots of different points in there, but there's one particular point I think comes to bear here. And one of the things that Jim Collins reports in the research they did was that companies that were really high performing, that were going from good to great, so they were getting better. He talks about this idea is that they were rigorous, not ruthless, around something very important in their business. And Amanda, what is that rigor? And not being ruthless, but being rigorous around specifically in the good to great. Because what's that idea around?
It's around their processes and their people, Tim.
Hmm.
So being really rigorous about making sure that your people are doing the right things, the right fit, the right spots. He would say the right people in the right seats on the bus, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that particular book, and having the rigorous conversations that whether the people and the processes are serving your team and your company and where you want to go. And if they're not, then dealing with it in a very rigorous way. When you're rigorous, you're not ignoring, right?
Yeah.
You are dealing with things in the moment. And so, from a people perspective, which is what we're really focusing on in this conversation, it's not just letting things slide.
Yeah.
It's actually becoming a leader that is known for being rigorous, not letting things slide,
Yeah.
right, in the moment.
Yeah.
But not being ruthless. So
Right.
that comment around not being ruthless is you're not that leader that if someone on your team makes a mistake, the hammer's coming down and you are done. That is not what they're talking about.
No.
They're talking about making sure that you're having real, honest debrief conversations, for example. What worked? What didn't work? Why isn't it working for us? And being caring in those conversations, not ruthless.
Yeah, no, and it's a great, again, it's a really important balance. On one level, super rigorous about dealing with these things, having those conversations, connecting with people, touching base with your maybe people who maybe are underperforming, people who are overachieving, making sure you're rigorous about connecting, not being ruthless in the way that you deal with people. Again, not reactionary, but at the same time, what I remember in that book when I read it originally, what really I took from that is that you have to recognize the impact when you don't have that conversation and you leave people on the team, you leave people who are either on the wrong bus, according to the analogy in that book, and they shouldn't even be on the bus anymore. You got to get them off the bus. If this is no longer the bus for them to take them where they want to go and where you need to go, then you need to ask yourself some different questions. And part of that is, do their values no longer match your values? In relationship to work and productivity, for instance. And the second thing I think, when I think about that is, and he talks about, is maybe they're on the right bus still, but as he said in that analogy, maybe they're on the wrong seat. Maybe something's shifted, and we need to find them a different seat. Now, really, really important, don't give them a new seat if the bus is no longer for them, because all you're doing is moving a problem. So
Yeah.
again, you could take underperforming Bob and you can put him on another team, but is he magically going to become overperforming or performing Bob? If he isn't, remember, you're just taking your problem and you're moving it along. You're just moving it to somebody else. And the litmus test I would give to all of this for you, if you're listening as a leader, the next time you look at making the selfish decision, not to deal with a performance problem and to take work from one person and put it on another, ask yourself two questions. Number one, if you were the person that you were putting the work on, how would you feel about it? That's the first litmus test.
Hmm.
Second of all, if that doesn't help you, if ask this, if that was my child, I have a 32-year-old daughter and a 28-year-old son. If that was my 28-year-old son and he came home and he told me what was happening, would I think that was a good strategy? Or would I be looking at him saying, hey, I think your leader needs to have a different kind of rigorous conversation with Sally, Bob, or Frank, because this cannot work long term, because you can't do the work of two or three people. It's not going to happen. As you said earlier in the conversation, it leads to burnout, frustration, great people leaving, going other places, and it provides a whole world of hurt to us for sure. So, Amanda, listen, as we finish up this conversation today, if you were going to give a couple of just best practice advice to people, if they're going to approach this, and again, if you're listening in, I hope that you're writing some notes or maybe come back at this, because this happens more often than I think we want to
Yep.
really be honest about. But a couple of just best practices. If I've got this problem,
Yep.
what would you tell me to do?
Well, the first thing is you need to really have a personal honesty conversation and check with yourself. And do that however you need to. Go for a run, go for a walk, hire a coach, have a conversation, journal about it. But ask yourself honestly, what are your motivations? Are they self serving motivations or are they leadership driven motivations? Right.
Mm,
And have you created an environment on your team where you can have the stage set to have those conversations that need to be had, right? And I think a lot of times managers decide that, oh, team organizational culture, all that warm fuzzy stuff, like that's not important, right? But when it gets the rubber hits the road on the cost side of these discussions, it is really important. So,
mhm,
how do you feel about making sure you have a good, strong team? Have an honest conversation with yourself about that.
yeah.
Once you've ticked that box on the honesty pieces for yourself, I think then you need to be rigorous on following through on the expectations of every team member,
Mm,
right? And where are people performing and having those honest conversations with both your underperformers and your high achievers so that you all have a really good sense and about the team, its expectations and the expectations on individuals on that team. And if you don't have the skills, the models, the frameworks to be able to have those tough conversations, take some personal accountability and get them. Go buy the books we talked about today. Talk to other people who have skill in having those types of conversations with people. And the last thing is, and I think we've alluded this a few times, right? But make sure you are really having performance and learning development conversations with those high achievers
mm,
because we forget about that part of it too. If you just keep loading them up and they love it, but you're noticing, some signs and cracks and things in the rubble, you need to address those just as much as you need to with the underperformers. So
mm.
those would be the best practices I would list just right out of the gate, Tim.
Excellent. Those are good. And listen, I just want to speak directly to you. If you are a person who's struggling right now with performance, okay, and maybe there's a really great reason, do me a favor, stick up your hand and go to your manager, boss, and tell them what's going on and own it. Because, again, just respectfully, even if it's a really great reason, it has an impact on your colleagues. It has
Mm-hmm.
an impact. And so, if there's an extenuating circumstance, an anomaly going on in your life right now, and it's causing you to struggle with your productivity, and you know it's impacting others negatively, stick your hand up to your leader and tell them you're drowning a little bit and get some help. Secondly, if you're a chronic underperformer, frankly, and you are riding the coattails of others, can I just encourage you strongly? Can you stop that, please? Get in the game, contribute, carry your load, or get off the bus, because that is not healthy. It's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for them. And eventually it's going to erode, if it hasn't already, every personal relationship that you have, professional relationship you have around you. Because everybody's going to look at you as that guy or that lady who does that. So do me a favor. If your company is no longer the bus you want to be on, if you've lost belief in your leadership, in your job, in what you're doing, and you don't want to do it anymore, grow a pair of something and quit and move on and find something better for you that's going to give you delight and make you happy in your life, because you're not fooling anybody. that you enjoy coming to work every day. And the last thing I would say to you is, and this might sound crazy, but I really believe that very simply we'd ask ourselves, you know what? Getting up every day and going to work can be hard. Are you going to fun today? Meaning, is there some enjoyment in your job? Because if there isn't at the end of the day, that might be a real canary in the coal mine that everything's off. All bets are off now because we got to have some enjoyment along the way. Listen, I hope that this conversation has been helpful for you depending on what side you might be looking at this. Remember, it starts with belief. It starts with faith. Do I believe still that this is the job for me, my company, my leaders? And if I don't believe, or maybe I should leave. And as a leader, if you don't believe anymore in that person, you got to ask yourself a gut check question because you think you're hiding it, but you're not. Listen, go out and have an excellent day. Let's be highly productive, effective individuals, having fun, getting shit done, and kicking ass and taking names along the way. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.